Welcome back to the Tracy Take. I'm Tyler here with my brother Ryan. Today we are breaking down the Washington Commanders 2024 schedule. We're going to give our absolute floor and maximum ceiling for the team at the very end of the video. But before we get into it, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also tackle that bell to get notified when new videos come out. We have videos coming out every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And once when the season starts, we're going to have weekly prediction videos for all the Commanders games that you're not going to want to miss. So be sure to like, subscribe, and tackle that bell. So Ryan, let's quickly kind of recap the additions. I think that and the improvements that the Commanders have made going into the 2024 season that they've done the 2024 offseason. The biggest thing was just getting rid of as much bad crap off this team. Getting Jayden Daniels with the number 2 overall pick, hiring a new head coach in Dan Quinn. It was I've never really seen it so, maybe just because the past couple of years in the Tracy Take now following a lot more football. But unless if it was the Falcons team like Bobby Petrino, I've never seen a team just ship it in as much as the Commanders did last year. Like you could just tell, it'd be like by week 8, like nobody cared. Like everybody knew, like we're done with this. Ron Rivera, who I'm glad that he's healthy, he's had an amazing journey. But it seemed like everybody was like, okay, we're just done with this. Just everything going on. So I think the whole new
weird thing about them shipping it in for me was like they were like 3-4, like 4-5. Like when they were like, yeah, we're done. Like I was like, you guys are still somewhat in playoff contention.
Somewhat, yeah. It's not like the NFC is super deep or anything.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, that to me was weird because I remember they had just beaten New England, and then they the next week sold off Montez Sweat and Chase Young, and I was like, that makes no sense to me whatsoever. But
I guess that's fair too.
Anyways,
that would be a sign from the team internally, be like, oh, these guys don't care if you go and get rid of Montez Sweat. like these guys are done. So, but that being said, though, I mean, hiring Dan Quinn, a lot of key guys came over from there. I think the biggest thing was beefing up the offensive line, and Tyler Badage. Is it Badage? Badaji? Badass?
Badash.
Tyler. It's a Tyler, so he's a badass.
Okay.
He and beefing up that interior offensive line here as well. Dressing the secondary again. Still probably one of the biggest head-scratching moments, especially too if Christian Gonzalez moves on to be a Hall of Famer. But biggest head-scratching moment is them drafting Emmanuel Forbes over Christian Gonzalez. So you should be thanking them every chance that you get. But they added a lot. They added so much of good players, but this is I think a key sign to me of a team in a rebuild is a lot of these guys are veteran players. Going to get a guy like Bobby Wagner, who's in his mid-30s. And just as an example, but you know you're going to get solid minutes from him. You know he's a hard worker. You know he's going to be a good veteran for these young guys to learn from. And I think that's just going to be the overall theme for this Commanders team. But they do have some firepower still, though. I mean, still with Terry McLaurin, still with Jahan Dotson. I think they can make those steps forward. Added Austin Eckler as well. Just trying to revamp this entire team. Because they did have a couple of years, especially even with the Alex Smith and Taylor Heineke couple of years, they were kind of stuck in that mediocrity stage where I feel like they're always kind of picking in the 10th or so range. That being said, though, I know they did get Chase Young with second overall pick in like 2020. And so ignore me for that 1 year. But in general, though, what do you think the Commanders improved on the most going into this 2024 season?
I think you hit on it with just the overall offense. I think with Dan Quinn, they brought in, I think, some veteran guys that can set a floor on the defense. But just getting that offense back to a spot where it's deadly at mostly any point on the field. And one of the things that I don't think you did mention was the addition of Cliff Kingsbury. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are two of the best receivers at winning on the outside and outside the numbers. You look at Cliff Kingsbury's offense, he relies a lot on wide receivers winning outside the numbers. And then you look at Jayden Daniels, what he was able to do in college. I think he threw like 22 touchdowns his senior year or his final year in college to 0 interceptions to receivers outside the numbers. And so I think you look and like they're going to be running go balls nonstop. They're going to be turning this football field into a track meet, and I think doing a lot of really interesting things on offense. And in doing that, it's not like you can just pin your ears back and get after Jayden Daniels because he'll burn you with his legs also.
Yeah.
So I am really interested to just see the overall improvements that they made on offense. I don't think it will take right away. I think it'll take a season or two to really get like this offense cooking and get all of like I forget what like the audibles and the in play adjustments that in play scenarios is what I'm looking for. All the scenarios for this offense to really get things rolling on a consistent level.
And that's pretty common with not even just rookie quarterbacks. Obviously with rookie quarterbacks, but whenever there's like a regime change, it takes a year.
Yeah.
Even when shoot, Dan Quinn example, when Dan Quinn came over to the Falcons and Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator. I think that first year, I think they went 9-7, and it wasn't like a good year at all, like just very shaky and completely inconsistent. But they took that year to learn the Shanahan offense and kind of get Dan Quinn's guys in there and his kind of mantra, and get the players buy-in during that time. So I expect something similar as well. But you're right, though. I think there's going to be flashes of like what this could be in 2025. And I feel like they're just going to be different than the Texans than what the Texans were last year, just with their explosion overall. I feel like their defense, they had better guys on defense overall. I could be wrong on that. I mean, let me know in the comments on your opinions. But I'm not expecting – of course, nobody was expecting a Texans team last year that was like that. But I'm not expecting a similar type season from Commanders. I feel like this is going to be more of like a Trevor Lawrence rookie season where they go like 4-12 or 4-13. And so we'll walk through this schedule here. So let's week 1 at Tampa Bay, week 2 hosting the Giants, week 3 at Cincinnati on Monday Night Football, week 4 at Arizona, week 5 hosting Cleveland, week 6 at Baltimore. I will say, I think best case scenario, I think they go. I'm between 3-3 and 4-2. I'm personally leaning more towards 3-3. I think worst case scenario is 1-5. I think worst case scenario is 1-5, and like they maybe snag a game against the Giants or maybe the Cardinals. But I just don't see them beating the Bengals unless the Bengals are typically their normal week 3 selves as they've been the past couple of years. Baltimore's a no. Cleveland's most likely a no. Tampa Bay week 1. I mean, you never know. But I'm going to be picking Tampa Bay in that game. So I think best case scenario, though, is they win that game. They beat the Giants. They beat the Cardinals, but then lose to the AFC North teams. You're on mute, by the way. You're on mute still. Hey. Ryan, you're on mute. You're on mute. Yeah.
I had to cough, so I put myself on
mute. You're good. I'm sure what you said sounded amazing.
No, what I said was I think 3-3 is best case scenario. They beat the Cardinals, they beat the Giants, and they eke one out against Tampa Bay. I really think, especially on Monday Night Football, it'll be the first primetime game for Jayden Daniels. I think Cincinnati's just going to have too much offensive firepower for them to be able to contend with. And then, I mean, Cleveland and I believe Baltimore. Yeah, Cleveland and Baltimore, I think, are just going to be too good. Those teams are on another level. So 3-3, I think 1-5 is probably the floor.
Do you think the primetime thing, how big of a deal do you think that is? I mean, because Jayden Daniels, he played SEC football.
It's not necessarily like the primetime aspect. I think you have your rhythm, especially the first 2 weeks, you'll be set. You'll have your days, game on Sunday, like day off, game on Sunday, and then you'll have 2 days off, then the regular days, but then your game is at night. And I think that difference, I think it's just something to get used to. I know he played in the SEC. It is different, I think, on the road in the NFL. I think that will be a little different.
I would think the extra day of preparation for the other team, but you also get that extra day of preparation also. So that's I'd be curious about that. In general, though, it's the Bengals, and they should be better than the Commanders. So 3-3 ceiling, 1-5 floor. We didn't really talk too much about going 0-6. I don't think that's possible. It is a possibility, but I don't think that's going to happen in my opinion. I think they'll win one of these games. Week 7, hosting Carolina. Week 8, hosting Chicago. Week 9 at the Giants. Week 10, hosting Pittsburgh. Week 11, at Philly. The Week 12, hosting Dallas here. A little bit more favorable setup as well. I mean, Carolina, the Giants, and Pittsburgh, I think, are going to be beatable here. Pittsburgh one's going to be very interesting because that's the team. It's going to be interesting going Jayden Daniels going up against the Steelers defense. Maybe almost make it as like a litmus test on how you're going to be as a quarterback in the NFL. Chicago, though, I mean, technically they could, like on paper, though, that's just going to be an interesting matchup in general because it's going to be the number 1 versus number 2 pick. But on paper, though, Chicago should be way better than the Commanders. Then at Philly on a shortened week, and then Dallas as well. Back-to-back division games. I think once again, I think ceiling wise, I can even throw it in, and because since they got a couple division games in there, I can maybe even see 4-2 as their absolute ceiling. Like they beat Carolina, they beat the Giants and Chicago or Pittsburgh, and then win one of the games against Dallas or Philadelphia. Because we also don't really know how good those teams are going to be as well. But at the same time, though, I could look at it. I could see a floor of 2-4. I think during the stretch.
I'd say 2-4 is the floor. I think the ceiling is probably 3-3. I think Chicago's defense is going to be too good. And you could make a case that they beat Carolina, the Giants, and Pittsburgh. Yeah. Just with how those teams are expected to play, I think you could definitely make a case for them. But yeah, I think 2-4 is the good floor. We can 3-4, 3-3, 4-2. For the ceiling, I think is debatable.
I think that's fair. And so I will say at this point, for going with their ceiling, that they would be 6-6 through 12 weeks. So they would be in the playoff hunt still, for sure. So as we go into this final 6-game stretch here, Week 13 hosting Tennessee. Week 14 they have a bye. I don't think they'll lose that week. Week 15 at New Orleans. Week 16 hosting Philly. Week 17 hosting Atlanta. And last Week 18 at Dallas. Very unique because Tennessee and New Orleans, I think, are going to be interesting. Fringe on the outside looking in playoff teams, in my opinion, at best. Philly, Atlanta, and at Dallas, all those teams I would say you could pencil on paper playoff teams, but Dallas did lose a lot. Obviously, Dan Quinn, as we talked about, Philly and Atlanta did not have the season that they had last year, and they're going to have some pretty serious internal changes overall for both teams, losing some key veterans for Philly, and then Atlanta. New Kirk Cousins coming off torn Achilles, new head coach also, this whole new regime as well. I think 3-2, I think, is the ceiling to me. That's what I'm looking at as well. But at the same time, I think like 1-4 could be the floor.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's kind of how I was leaning also, was just I think this team has some good offensive pieces. I do think learning the new system and things will kind of slow it down, especially in the beginning of the year. But this defense really just lacks young talent. And to me, I think that's going to be, when you look at all of these teams, like Tennessee has DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley. New Orleans has Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara. Philly, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown. The list goes on for them. Atlanta, they have Bijan Robinson, they have Drake London, and then Dallas has CeeDee Lamb. And so, like, they all have, I think, offensive threats that can really stifle this Washington defense. And I know Dan Quinn is a really good defensive mind. One of the big things I think you looked at was he had Trayvon Diggs and like Micah Parsons last year in Dallas, and he was able to move those guys around. But those guys are also just really good football players. And they match up well against a lot of players because they are just really good football players. Yeah. And I don't think Washington has that. And so I think when you look at these fringe playoff teams, I do struggle to see them pulling out victories just because I think this defense is really bad.
Yeah. So, and that's where to me, it's doing the math. 4-13, absolute floor. 9-8, absolute ceiling. 9-8 could be potentially fringe. That looks like that's the best case scenario for this team. And I think that's fair as well when just looking at just the changes, just the internal changes going on. But I agree with you though. Like there are positives that you can go and build around, and we saw this with Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. We see this a lot with quarterbacks taken in the top 3. If you're a quarterback taken in the top 3, it's not like you're going to a powerhouse. It's what C.J. Stroud went through last year. Not every rookie quarterback gets to experience, especially too if they were picked in the top 5, unless Caleb Williams potentially could experience that because he's going to probably the best.
Yeah, but even then, he really was drafted to Carolina. They just traded that pick to the Bears.
Yeah. And they're writing thank you notes to Frank Reich every day. So with Commanders, though, I still think it's going to be on the outside looking in. Even 9-8 still not a guaranteed spot here. When I look at the record predictions that we gave them on our offseason recap, I actually had them at 4-13. You had them at 6-11. Mm-hmm. And I think that does kind of speak to, and I think that's about where they're going to fall. I just think, in general, their whole 53-man roster, there are still question marks, turmoil, offensive regime, and just overall mindset. Coming defensive regime also too, just changing. And how long is that going to take for them to click if it ever does click? Like they'll pick off a couple of these games. But in general, though, I would not be surprised if they're picking in the top 5 again next season.
Yeah, and I agree. I just think this defense is not up to par. I think this offense has the pieces. They just need to put it all together on that side, and then maybe beef up this offensive line a little bit more. But yeah, to me, it's just this defense that's really weighing this team down, just personnel-wise. So all in all, I think there's a lot of hope for the Commanders for future seasons. But I'm struggling to see them really making a push in 2024. So let's go ahead and wrap this video up here. If you guys have not already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below on what you think the Washington Commanders floor and ceiling are. Do you think we were spot on? Do you think we're wrong? Let us know. And on that, we will see you guys next time.